The rain had stopped just moments before midnight, leaving the glass walls of Carter Technologies shimmering with streaks of light from downtown San Francisco. From the 52nd floor, the skyline glowed like a circuit board alive, electric and merciless. Inside the main conference room, chaos ruled. Equations filled every inch of the digital board. Engineers argued over algorithms that refused to make sense, and coffee cups stood like fallen soldiers between laptops. 20 experts, 20 barked Arthur, the head of engineering, slamming his cup down so hard that a splash of dark liquid hit his wrist. And no one can solve this variable. It's just one goddamn variable. Silence. Then a nervous voice, "Richard's going to lose it." Outside the frosted glass walls, a woman slowed her mop, tilting her head to listen. Valentina Ramirez, the night janitor, had one earbud in soft jazz, playing from her phone, the other ear open to the world of people who had everything she didn't. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass-brown skin-tired eyes, but a gaze sharp enough to slice through the noise. When the elevator chimed, the engineers shuffled out like ghosts, clutching tablets, mumbling formulas under their breath. Valentina watched them leave, one of them carrying 2 empty pizza boxes, another rubbing his temples like he'd been solving the fate of the universe. When the last one disappeared behind the elevator doors, she pushed her cart forward and stepped into the abandoned room. It smelled like espresso, frustration, and genius. "Well," she muttered, tossing her rag into the bucket. "Guess I'll clean up another mess made by men with PhDs. Her eyes drifted to the digital board, still lit up with the problem, an avalanche of symbols and numbers that had beaten the best minds in Silicon Valley. She walked closer, fingers brushing the air, like she could feel the logic vibrating there. She wasn't supposed to care. Her shift paid by the hour, her life measured by time, not talent. But curiosity had always been her rebellion. She frowned, squinting. Something about the equation, it was off. The variables chased themselves in circles, elegant, but wrong. "You're dancing around it," she whispered, almost amused. Valentina picked up a red marker, hesitated, then almost without thinking, started writing. Her movements were calm, instinctive. A flip here, a substitution there, a simplification that no one in that room of overpaid geniuses had dared to try. Her hand stopped. She stepped back, tilted her head, then smiled. "There you are," she murmured. "Took you long enough." At that exact moment, a voice cut through the silence. "Who did this?" Valentina jumped. The marker fell from her hand, clattering against the marble floor. Standing in the doorway was Richard Carter, CEO of Carter Tech. He looked like every Wall Street magazine cover she had ever seen, tall, cold, precise. The kind of man who could stop a room with a glance. His tailored gray suit caught the faint blue light from the board, and his eyes, an unfeeling steel blue, were fixed on her. For a second, neither spoke. The city hummed far below them. "Was it you?" he asked, voice low, but sharp enough to cut through glass. Valentina blinked, heart pounding. "No, it was my mop. She's the genius here." His jaw twitched. "Don't play games. I'm not. I just thought I'd clean the mess," she replied, trying to sound casual, even as her pulse raced. "And apparently your people left the wrong kind of dirt on the board." Richard stepped closer, eyes flicking from her face to the equation. "You changed it, improved it." He stared at the board, then back at her. "Do you even understand what this is?" She met his gaze head on. Apparently enough to fix it. For the first time in years, the man known for freezing entire rooms into silence couldn't find his words. He looked at her, really looked, and something flickered across his face. Not admiration, not yet, but curiosity. "Where did you learn this?" he asked finally. University of Georgia, she said with a shrug. 2 years of engineering before life decided I was better with a mop. His brows furrowed. You dropped out? Couldn't afford to stay, she said, picking up the rag again. My mom got sick. Bills piled up. I traded textbooks for bleach bottles. You know how it goes. He didn't. Not even close. Richard stared at her like she'd just rearranged gravity. She was standing in front of him, in a faded blue janitor uniform, her hair pulled back with a cheap elastic band, yet the room, the entire glass and steel kingdom of Carter Tech, felt smaller around her. Leave it, he said suddenly. What? The board. Don't erase it. I want the team to see this tomorrow. Valentina raised a brow. You want to tell your experts a cleaning lady solved what they couldn't. He ignored the sting in her words. I want you here, tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. She blinked. You promoting me to logical reasoning janitor? A ghost of a smile threatened his lips, but he hid it quickly. Just be here. Valentina studied him for a moment, then smirked. Fine, but I'm bringing my mop. She gets jealous when I work with other geniuses. For a moment, just a moment, something unspoken passed between them. A spark neither expected. Then she pushed her cart toward the door. Good night, boss, she said lightly. Oh, and next time, try smiling. It doesn't hurt, I promise. He didn't answer, just stood there alone, staring at the board. The corrected equation glowed red beneath the fluorescent lights, mocking everything he thought he knew about control. For the first time in months, Richard Carter smiled. But when the elevator doors closed behind her, Valentina leaned against the metal wall, heart thudding so loudly she could hear it echo. The city lights spilled over her dark skin like fragments of gold. She told herself it was nothing, just a weird night, a funny story to tell her mother. But deep down she knew something had shifted. In that glass tower overlooking San Francisco Bay, she had just done the unthinkable, cracked a billion-dollar problem and caught the attention of a man who didn't believe in accidents. And somewhere between the hum of the elevator and the distant sound of rain, she wondered just for a second if fate had finally decided to stop ignoring her. Tomorrow, she told herself, tomorrow would be the same as every other day. She couldn't have been more wrong. Morning sunlight spilled across the glass facade of Carter Technologies, cutting through the mist that hung over San Francisco Bay. The building gleamed like a temple of innovation, but inside tension simmered beneath its polished steel and spotless marble floors. At exactly 10:00 a.m., the elevator chimed and opened to reveal Valentina Ramirez, dressed in her crisp blue janitor uniform, her mop balanced across her cart like a sword in its sheath. She had told herself not to show up, that CEOs didn't make appointments with people who scrub toilets. Yet here she was, standing in the same corridor where she'd mopped floors just 12 hours before. Employees turned to look as she walked past, whispers curling through the air like cigarette smoke. Is that the cleaning lady? What's she doing on this floor? Maybe she's lost. Their curiosity rolled off her like dust. She'd lived a lifetime beneath people's assumptions. Today wouldn't be the first or the last. Richard Carter was already in the conference room when she entered, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows with his back to the city. He didn't turn immediately. He seemed carved from the same steel as the skyline behind him. On the massive table lay tablets, laptops, empty coffee cups, ghosts of the late-night war fought over equations and pride. You came, he said without looking at her. You invited me, she replied, and I never ignore a millionaire's curiosity. That drew a faint smirk from him, just enough to crease the mask he usually wore. Sit, he said. I'd rather stand, she said, gripping the handle of her mop like a staff of quiet defiance. Richard finally turned his blue-gray eyes, cutting through the light. You solved something last night that 20 of my engineers couldn't. I cleaned up their math. Same thing I do with floors. Get rid of what doesn't belong. A low murmur rippled through the room as Arthur, the CTO, entered, with 3 senior engineers trailing behind. Arthur, tall and fair-haired with tired eyes, froze when he saw her. Is this a joke? He asked Richard. No, Richard said simply. She's the reason your models started working again. Arthur frowned. You're telling me I'm telling you to listen. Richard interrupted, his voice sharp but calm. He gestured toward the glowing digital board. Explain it, he told Valentina. The room stilled. Valentina stared at him for a beat, then set her mop aside and approached the board. The marker felt strange in her hand, a relic from a past she'd buried. Her reflection trembled faintly on the glass screen as she began to draw. Your code loops here, she said, sketching a red circle around a tangled part of the formula. You're feeding it too much data, chasing an answer that doesn't exist. I cut this variable C and the system corrects itself. Arthur squinted, leaning forward. That's statistically impossible. Maybe, she said, but floors don't care about statistics either. If it's dirty, you clean it. For a moment, no one breathed. The board processed her input, recalculating, and then the numbers stabilized. Arthur's jaw dropped. She's right, he whispered. It's optimized. Richard didn't move. His expression was unreadable, but something burned quietly behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe admiration, maybe something more dangerous. Valentina capped the marker and turned to him. Satisfied. Not even close, he said softly. You've just rewritten 6 months of work. Well, she said with a shrug, you're welcome. I'll send my invoice, 1 mop, 2 paper towels, and a PhD in common sense. Arthur laughed before he could stop himself. Richard shot him a glare, but Valentina caught it, a flash of humor she wasn't supposed to see. After the meeting, when the engineers filed out, Richard stayed behind. She was wiping down the table, moving efficiently, pretending not to notice him watching. You don't belong down there, he said, finally nodding toward the lower floors. She looked up. I don't belong up here either. That's kind of the story of my life. He crossed his arms. What if I offered you a position temporary? Observation assistant. You sit in on our research meetings. Give us your perspective. She blinked. You mean a token diversity project? His jaw tightened. No. I mean, I want your mind in the room. Valentina paused. The idea felt like both a miracle and a trap. She studied him, the immaculate suit, the controlled breath, the faint pulse at his temple that betrayed his tension. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't pitying her either. He was testing her. I still have floors to clean, she said finally. Then clean them, he replied. But after that, come to the meeting at noon. Bring your mop if it helps you think. Her lips parted in surprise, but before she could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving her standing in the middle of the room, caught between 2 worlds, one she scrubbed and one that suddenly wanted her voice. Noon, she was there again. The boardroom smelled faintly of espresso and ozone, and the view stretched endlessly across the bay. The team was already assembled, murmuring until she entered. Every eye turned to her. Richard didn't announce her. He didn't need to. His presence commanded silence. Let's begin, he said, gesturing for Valentina to sit beside him. She hesitated before pulling out a chair, polished chrome smooth leather, and sitting down, mop propped against the table leg, like a silent companion. The discussion began full of jargon and acronyms, but Valentina listened, her brain translating their language into patterns she could grasp. When the team hit another roadblock, she leaned forward. "Why are you complicating it?" she asked. Arthur looked annoyed. "Because simplification causes data loss. Not if you're simplifying the noise," she said. "You're treating everything as valuable, but not everything matters. That's the mistake." Richard's eyes flicked to her. "Explain." She picked up a glass of water, held it up. "If you drop ink in here, it spreads. You can't see the water clearly anymore, right? But if you keep pouring fresh water, the ink fades. You didn't erase the ink, you diluted the chaos." The room went quiet. Arthur leaned back, stunned. She's describing noise filtering in plain English. Richard's mouth curved slightly. And she's right again. Valentina shrugged. "I just clean things." It was then, when the room erupted in half-nervous, half-impressed laughter, that Richard realized he'd made a decision he couldn't take back. He had invited her into his world, and somehow she was making it better. After the meeting, he walked her to the elevator. The air between them was heavy with something neither could name. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "You see things differently." "Different doesn't always fit," she replied. "It makes people uncomfortable." "Maybe that's exactly what we need," he said, his voice low. She glanced up at him, a teasing spark in her eyes. "Careful, Mr. Carter. You sound like you're complimenting me. Maybe I am." The elevator doors slid open, spilling silver light across the floor. Valentina hesitated before stepping in. "I'll take the job," she said finally. "But I keep the uniform. It reminds everyone, including me, who I am." The doors began to close, but Richard's voice stopped them. "That uniform doesn't define you, Valentina." She met his gaze through the narrowing gap. "Maybe not. But it helps me remember who actually does the cleaning around here." The doors shut, and Richard found himself staring at his own reflection in the mirrored surface, wondering when the air had started feeling too thin in his own empire. Valentina leaned against the elevator wall as it descended, her heart still racing from the weight of his voice. Outside, the city gleamed under the Californian sun, unaware that somewhere between power and humility, two worlds had just begun to collide. And in that quiet moment before the doors opened, she realized something terrifying. She wanted to see him again. The week that followed felt like a dream that Valentina wasn't sure she was allowed to have. Every morning, she rode the elevator up past the floors where she used to mop and stepped into a world built on glass caffeine and restless ambition. The badge clipped to her uniform still said, "Maintenance." But now people looked at her differently, some with awe, most with suspicion. The whispers didn't stop. They only grew sharper, floating behind her, like the hum of fluorescent lights. Is she some kind of experiment? Carter must be losing his mind. I heard she solved the algorithm no one could crack. Valentina didn't respond. She just smiled the way she always had, like someone who knew the joke no one else got. She took her seat in the conference room mop, leaning against the wall, like a quiet witness to the impossible. Richard Carter was already there, suit immaculate, sleeves rolled up just enough to hint that he was human after all. The sun poured through the panoramic windows, glinting off his watch, cutting golden edges across his jaw. He barely glanced at her, but she caught it, the flicker of acknowledgement, a silent good morning that carried more warmth than any word he'd ever said. Arthur was mid-presentation, gesturing at a new data model. "We've integrated the fix, but we're still seeing delays in the neural sync." Richard looked over at Valentina. Thoughts. The room went still. Heads turned. Valentina froze for a second, realizing he was serious. Then she leaned forward, tracing her finger on the digital board. "You're running the process backward. It's like mopping a dirty floor before sweeping the dust. You're teaching the AI to think with the noise still in the room." Arthur frowned. "That's not how it works. Maybe not in theory, she said, smiling faintly, but theory doesn't clean up after itself. A few of the younger engineers chuckled under their breath. Even Richard's lips twitched, a fraction of amusement breaking through his ice. He nodded toward the board. Show us. She walked up her reflection, overlapping the glowing code, and with a few quick strokes rearranged the sequence. The algorithm blinked, recalculated, and suddenly the error dropped to 0. The room erupted in murmurs. Holy shit, Arthur whispered. She did it again. Richard's gaze lingered on her longer than it should have. There was something about the way she stood calm, grounded, utterly unshaken by the attention. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply belonged. After the meeting, he caught her by the elevator. You make it look easy, he said quietly. She shrugged. Everything's easy when you've been underestimated your whole life. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither looked away. Something passed between them. Something electric, alive, too fragile to name. The elevator dinged, and she stepped inside. But before the doors closed, she said, You should try smiling more often. It makes you look almost human. He laughed, just once, low and surprised. Almost. The doors slid shut. By Friday, Valentina was no longer the company's secret. The story had spread across every department. The janitor who fixed the CEO's code. The girl from nowhere who now attended meetings with the top brass. Some admired her, others despised her, but everyone watched. That evening, a company-wide event filled the rooftop terrace, celebrating the firm's new AI milestone, the one she had unknowingly made possible. String lights hung over sleek cocktail tables, champagne shimmered in crystal flutes, and the city stretched endlessly below, twinkling like liquid gold. Valentina lingered near the railing, the cool breeze lifting her curls. She wore a borrowed dress, simple navy blue, soft against her skin. She had told Arthur she wouldn't come, but he'd insisted. If you don't show up, they'll think you're ashamed, he'd said. Besides, it's your success too. She hadn't expected Richard to be there. But of course he was immovable, flawless, surrounded by executives who hung on his every word. His laughter, rare and subdued, cut through the night like a slow burn. Valentina, Arthur called, appearing beside her with 2 glasses. You're making headlines, you know. A janitor who outsmarted MIT. She smirked. My mom would be proud. Or terrified. Hard to tell. Arthur handed her a drink. Ignore the stares. You belong here. I belong where my paycheck says I belong, she said, raising her glass anyway. But as the night wore on, she felt Richard's presence long before he approached. When he finally did, it was with that same quiet intensity, like gravity itself had shifted to make room for him. You clean up well, he said. She arched a brow. Pun intended. He almost smiled. Unintentional. You look different. Clothes do that. Magic fabric from Ross Dress for Less, she replied dryly, and he laughed, a sound she still wasn't used to hearing. Walk with me, he said after a moment. They moved away from the crowd, toward the far end of the terrace, where the city opened up beneath them. The wind played with her hair, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. I've been thinking, he began. That's usually dangerous, she teased. He ignored it. You don't see patterns the way the rest of us do. You feel them. You break them apart like music. Or like dirt, she said. Whichever metaphor fits your corporate poetry. He smiled faintly. You ever think about finishing your degree? Her expression faltered. That part of my life's over. It doesn't have to be. Not everyone gets second chances, Richard. Then maybe you're wrong about that too, he said, voice low, almost intimate. The air thickened, She could feel the heat from his body, even in the cool breeze. For a second, they stood too close, too aware. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from the strange gravity between them. "I should get back," she whispered. "Of course." His voice softened, almost reluctant. "Good night, Valentina." As she turned, her heel caught the edge of the tile. She stumbled, and his hand shot out, catching her wrist. It was instinct, but when their skin met, the world seemed to stop. Electricity rushed between them, fierce and unmistakable. Her pulse hammered. His grip loosened, but he didn't let go right away. Their eyes locked hers, wide and uncertain, his darkened with something that didn't belong in a professional rooftop event. "Careful," he murmured. "You almost fell." "Maybe I did," she said softly. He blinked a breath, caught between disbelief and something deeper. But before he could answer, Arthur's voice called from across the terrace. "Carter investors want a photo." The moment snapped like glass underfoot. Richard let go his hand, lingering half a second too long before retreating. Valentina stepped back, the city lights flickering in her eyes. "Go," she said, forcing a smile. "Your kingdom awaits." He hesitated, searching her face for something neither of them was ready to admit. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing back into the sea of champagne and suits. She stayed by the railing long after the laughter faded behind her, her heart pounding like a secret she couldn't confess. The wind off the bay was cold, but her skin burned where his fingers had touched. She told herself it meant nothing that he was her boss, that this was just adrenaline. But when she looked at the skyline glittering like constellations she'd never reach, she couldn't shake the feeling that her world was tilting slowly, dangerously, toward his. The night was heavy with the kind of silence that only followed storms, the kind that made every light seem sharper, every sound more intimate. Carter Technologies had emptied hours ago, its corridors now echoing with the faint hum of machines and the soft buzz of neon exit signs. Valentina was alone on the 48th floor, reviewing a spreadsheet Arthur had asked her to glance over before the next morning's presentation. She wasn't supposed to be there this late, but leaving early had never been her style. The elevator chimed behind her, startling her from her thoughts. The doors slid open to reveal Richard Carter. His tie loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. He looked nothing like the man who commanded boardrooms. There was something raw about him now, tired, almost human. "You're still here," he said, his voice low but edged with surprise. She looked up, trying not to notice how the dim lights made his features softer, less like marble, and more like skin. "Someone has to make sure your empire doesn't collapse overnight." He gave a faint laugh, stepping inside. "I thought you only cleaned messes, not prevented them." "I'm evolving," she said, closing her laptop. "Maybe I'll start charging extra for brain work. Maybe I'll start paying you what you're worth," he replied, his tone so even it made her heartbeat quicken. Before she could find a clever retort, the building lights flickered. Once, twice, then everything went black. "Seriously," she muttered. In a billion-dollar tower, Richard exhaled sharply. Backup generators should have. The elevator doors behind him sealed shut with a metallic snap, and then there was nothing but silence and the dim red glow of the emergency lights. They exchanged a look. "You have got to be kidding me," Valentina said, laughing under her breath. "Trapped with the boss. That's a headline waiting to happen." "Relax," Richard said, pulling out his phone. "No signal." "Of course," he sighed. "System glitch. Shouldn't last long." She leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "So, what do CEOs talk about while waiting for rescue stock prices or their childhood trauma?" He shot her a look, but she caught the flicker of a smile. "You assume I have either." "Oh, come on," she teased. "You were born rich, right? Silver spoon, perfect school, perfect hair. You must have at least one tragic backstory." He hesitated, the playful tension shifting almost imperceptibly. "My father," he said quietly, didn't believe in mistakes. Not mine, not anyone's. Perfection was the only language he spoke. She blinked, caught off guard by his honesty. "And you, I became fluent." There was something in his tone, bitter, self-mocking, that twisted in her chest. She saw it then, beneath the surface polish. The pressure, the exhaustion, the loneliness of a man who'd built his walls so high, even he didn't know how to climb down. "My mom used to say, 'Perfection's for people who don't have rent to pay,'" she said softly. She worked 3 jobs and still managed to laugh every day. That was her version of perfect. Richard looked at her, really looked. The faint red light traced the curve of her cheek, the quiet fire in her eyes. "You talk about her a lot." "She's why I'm here," Valentina said. "When she got sick, I dropped out to take care of her. Never thought I'd see another formula again. Then one day I was mopping and saw your team fighting over a code. And I thought, maybe cleaning isn't the only thing I'm good at." He was silent for a long moment. The sound of the building creaked faintly around them. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Dropping out?" She shrugged. "Sometimes. But if I hadn't, I wouldn't be standing here trapped in an elevator with a man who's apparently afraid of imperfection." He raised an eyebrow. "You think I'm afraid? I think you're terrified." The air thickened between them. His jaw tightened, but there was no anger in his eyes, only something unguarded, something that looked suspiciously like vulnerability. "You know," he said, stepping closer, "you're the only person who's ever spoken to me like that." "Maybe that's the problem," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment they stood there, 2 silhouettes in the half-light, the city far below them sleeping beneath a blanket of fog. The elevator felt smaller, warmer. He was close enough that she could smell the faint trace of cedar on his skin, the ghost of his cologne, mixing with static air. "Valentina," he said softly, like he was testing the weight of her name. "Yeah." He hesitated, eyes searching hers for something neither could name. The tension between them was fragile, alive, something that might shatter if either moved too quickly. "I think," he began, voice almost rough, "you terrify me more than failure ever did." She laughed, but it came out uneven. "Then you should probably fire me." "I can't." "Why not?" "Because you're the first thing in years that doesn't feel like a calculation." Her breath caught. The red light flickered again, casting his face in momentary darkness. When it steadied, he was still watching, her eyes unreadable. "You don't mean that," she said quietly, trying to steady herself. "This, whatever this is, it's adrenaline. Claustrophobia. A power outage fantasy." "Maybe," he said. "But tell me you don't feel it too." She opened her mouth to deny it, to make some cutting remark, but the words refused to come. Because he was right. She did feel it, the pull, the spark, the dizzying sense that the ground beneath her feet wasn't as solid as it used to be. The silence stretched. He took one more step, close enough that their reflections merged in the polished steel. His voice dropped, barely audible. "Tell me to stop." She should have. God, she wanted to. But instead she whispered, "Don't." The elevator shuddered back to life at that exact second. The lights flared, the machinery hummed, and the moment broke like glass underfoot. Both of them froze, reality crashing back around them. When the doors finally slid open on the lobby floor, Valentina stepped out first, her pulse still wild, her heart pounding in a rhythm she couldn't control. She didn't look back, didn't dare. Richard stayed behind, one hand pressed against the cool steel wall, the ghost of her voice still ringing in his head. "Don't." Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. Valentina walked fast, her heels clicking against the marble, like a heartbeat she was trying to outrun. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was her boss, that she'd imagined the way his eyes had darkened when he'd said her name. But when she reached the glass doors and caught her reflection in the city lights, she saw it there, something she hadn't seen in years: hope and fear. Behind her, 48 floors above, Richard watched from the window of his office the city reflected in his eyes. For the first time in his life, the numbers didn't make sense anymore, and deep down, beneath the logic and the armor, he knew exactly why. Some lines once crossed could never be redrawn. The following morning, Seattle looked washed clean, streets glistening from last night's rain, the early light spilling gold across glass towers. Inside Carter Technologies, everything appeared the same: the rhythm of heels on marble, the soft hum of espresso machines, the murmurs of morning meetings. Yet beneath the surface, something had shifted. Richard Carter arrived at 7:00 a.m., sharp as always. He walked through the lobby with his usual calm precision, nodding to the receptionist, his face an unreadable mask. No one could tell that he hadn't slept, that every time he closed his eyes, he saw Valentina's face, illuminated by the red light of the stalled elevator, her voice echoing like a secret he couldn't shake. On the 48th floor, Valentina stood by the digital board, scribbling notes, while pretending her hands weren't trembling. Her reflection in the glass showed someone who looked calm, collected, but she felt like chaos dressed in uniform. She had replayed the moment 100 times. His voice, his eyes, that impossible closeness. And every time she did, her chest burned with both shame and something dangerously close to longing. When the elevator doors opened and Richard stepped out, her heart stuttered. He walked straight past her, his expression perfectly neutral. "Morning, Ramirez," he said, not breaking stride. "Morning, Mr. Carter." She answered, her tone deliberately steady. The air between them was electric, yet completely silent. The rest of the team noticed, of course. The stolen glances, the invisible line of tension threading between CEO and janitor, turned consultant. But no one dared to comment, not when the boss's face looked like carved stone. At 10:00 a.m., the team gathered for a major project briefing. Arthur stood at the head of the conference table explaining data projections, while engineers scrolled through tablets. Valentina sat quietly near the end, pretending to take notes while trying to ignore the magnetic pull across the table. Richard's voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Ramirez, you had an alternative approach for this module, didn't you?" Dozens of eyes turned her way. Her pulse jumped. "Yes," she said, standing up. "I just simplified the logic sequence. The system was using too many recursive loops, so I replaced them with a weighted vector model." Arthur nodded. "Go on." She walked to the board and began drawing the simplified structure. Her movements were fluid, confident. "Sometimes the simplest route works best," she said. "Like cleaning too many chemicals, just make a mess." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Even Richard's mouth curved slightly, though his gaze stayed fixed on her. There was pride in it, and something else. Something unspoken. When the meeting ended, she began gathering her notes, hoping to slip away quietly. But before she could, Richard said, "Ramirez, stay a moment." The others filed out, leaving them alone in the wide glass room overlooking the sound. He leaned against the table, arms folded. "About last night," he began. Her breath caught. "There's nothing to talk about," she said quickly. He studied her face, his tone low, careful. "That's one way to look at it." "I prefer it that way," she said, forcing a small smile. "Makes it easier to come to work." Richard exhaled slowly, looking out at the gray skyline. "You think I don't know how dangerous this is?" You think I didn't spend all night trying to reason it away? She met his eyes. Then you know what I'm about to say. That we pretend it never happened, he said quietly. Yes. He nodded once. The silence stretched brittle and heavy. All right, he said finally, if that's what you want. But as he walked past her toward the door, his hand brushed hers on the table, barely a second of contact, but enough to unravel everything they'd just agreed upon. Her fingers tingled long after he left. By evening, the storm that had hovered over the Sound returned, clouds rolling in dark and low. Valentina stayed late again, caught between work and restlessness. The corridors were quiet, the glow from the city below spilling through the glass like liquid silver. She was in the break room refilling her coffee when Rachel, one of the engineers, entered. You still here? Rachel asked. You've been running non-stop lately. Valentina smiled. Old habits. Some stains just take longer to clean. Rachel laughed, then leaned on the counter. You know, people talk about you a lot. The cleaning lady who solved what 20 engineers couldn't. You're kind of a legend now. A legend with a mop, Valentina said lightly. Rachel hesitated. And about you and Richard. People notice things. Valentina froze for just a second, her mug hovering mid-air. People should focus on their work. They should, Rachel said carefully. But gossip moves faster than code in this place. Before Valentina could reply, the door opened again. Richard stepped in holding a folder. He paused when he saw them, the room suddenly too small. Rachel, he said curtly, I'll need your notes on the integration module by morning. Yes, sir. Rachel grabbed her cup and left quickly, leaving the air thick behind her. Valentina set her mug down. You really know how to make an exit awkward for everyone. He ignored the comment, studying her face instead. Is it true? She asked after a beat. What people are saying? He frowned. What are they saying? That there's something between us. He stepped closer, his voice quiet, but firm. There is something between us. We're just pretending there isn't. Her heart thudded painfully. You shouldn't say that. Maybe not. But it's the truth. Lightning flashed outside, casting their reflections across the glass walls. Two figures standing too close, drawn together by something neither could control. You think this will end well? She whispered. A CEO and a cleaning lady turned consultant. It's a fairy tale written for tragedy. Or maybe it's not a fairy tale at all, he said softly. Maybe it's just real. She wanted to tell him to stop, to remind him of boundaries, titles, rules. But the storm outside mirrored the one inside her, a pull that refused to be rational. When the thunder rolled through the city, he reached out his hand, finding hers again. Not commanding this time, but almost tentative, as if asking permission. She didn't pull away. The air between them seemed to vibrate. Her pulse matched the storm's rhythm, loud and impossible to hide. And then the sound came, sharp, mechanical, slicing through the quiet. Ding! The elevator at the end of the hall opened. A figure stepped out, a man from the PR department, phone in hand, his eyes widening slightly as he spotted them. Mr. Carter, he said, startled. Sorry to interrupt. There's an issue. Richard straightened immediately, his hand slipping from hers. What kind of issue? The man hesitated. You'll want to see it. He turned his phone around. On the screen was a news headline already spreading online. Carter Tech CEO's mystery consultant. The cleaning lady genius, a photo of Valentina mid-meeting her mop cart in the background, flashed beneath the title. Her blood ran cold. Richard's jaw tightened. Where did this come from? Social media picked it up. It's going viral. For a moment, none of them spoke. The storm outside raged harder, wind whipping against the glass. Valentina's voice was barely a whisper. They're making a joke out of me. Richard looked at her, and for the first time, his control cracked. Not for long. He strode toward the door, already barking orders into his phone. Valentina stayed frozen in the break room. The reflection of the headlines still glowing on the dark window beside her. Her own face, staring back, caught between humiliation and disbelief. Outside, thunder rolled across the sound like a warning. By the time she finally moved, the night had swallowed the city whole, and in that silence, she knew nothing between them would ever be simple again. By morning, the city had already turned her into a headline. The cleaning lady who outsmarted Silicon Valley, CEO's secret genius or secret affair. The articles multiplied faster than wildfire, each one twisting the story a little more. Her brilliance was secondary. What mattered was the picture a billionaire CEO and a janitor who had no business being near his world. When Valentina walked into the office that day, eyes followed her like searchlights. The whispers that once hid behind corners were now open unashamed. Screens flickered with the same image, her standing beside Richard. During a presentation, her mop cart blurred in the background, like some cruel metaphor for where she truly belonged. Arthur intercepted her near the elevator's voice, low and uneasy. I tried to get the PR team to handle it, but it's everywhere. Some idiot leaked internal footage from the meeting. Great, she muttered, tightening her grip on her coffee cup. Now the whole country knows I can solve equations and scrub floors. He gave her a sympathetic look. Richard's furious, not at you, at the situation. But she could already feel the weight of it pressing down the line between admiration and mockery evaporating. Every step through the building felt heavier, as if the marble floors had turned into quicksand. When she reached the conference room, Richard was waiting, pacing near the window, a storm trapped inside a suit. They're calling it a scandal, he said, tossing a tablet onto the table. They think I'm exploiting you for PR or sleeping with you. Her throat tightened. You think I don't know that I'm handling it? By doing what? Making it go away. He turned to her eyes sharp. Yes, before it destroys your reputation and mine. Something in his tone made her flinch. My reputation, she repeated. I didn't have one to begin with. Remember, I was the janitor. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant, she said quietly. You're ashamed of me. His silence was worse than denial. Outside, the clouds thickened, the same gray haze that had covered the city the night before. Valentina. She shook her head, voice trembling now. You know what the cruelest part of all this is? They finally saw me. For a minute, I wasn't invisible. I was something. And now, she looked away, her reflection caught in the glass behind him, distorted and ghostly. Now I'm just a joke again. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're not a joke. You're the reason this company is still standing. Then say it, she said, her eyes snapping to his. Say that, out loud, in front of them. Tell the world the truth. His expression hardened. It's not that simple, because you care about your image more than mine. The words hit him like a slap, but he didn't argue, and that silence, cold, suffocating, was answer enough. She gathered her papers, her movements sharp, mechanical. I'm done, Richard. I quit. Valentina, don't. But she was already walking toward the door. Find someone else to fix your equations, someone who fits your world. The sound of the door closing echoed through the room, like the crack of a gavel. That night the storm returned, fierce and unrelenting. Rain lashed against her apartment window, wind howling through the narrow streets of East Oakland. Valentina sat on the edge of her bed, scrolling through the endless feed of headlines. She didn't recognize the woman they were describing, some myth spun from envy and curiosity. A knock at the door made her freeze. When she opened it, Richard stood there soaked through hair plastered to his forehead. He looked nothing like the man who ran boardrooms. He looked wrecked. "Are you insane?" she demanded. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see you," he said, voice low but urgent. "You didn't answer my calls. I didn't want to." He stepped inside before she could stop him. The small apartment was warm and dim, filled with the scent of rain and cheap vanilla candles. There were books stacked on the counter, a photo of her mother and sister taped above the fridge. It was a different universe from his. Richard looked around slowly, then back at her. "This is where you live." "Don't start," she warned. "I know it's not the penthouse view you're used to." He took a breath. "You think that's what I care about? Isn't it?" she shot back. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? The second people saw us in the same room, they laughed, because it doesn't make sense. We don't make sense." He moved closer. "Maybe the world doesn't have to make sense," she laughed bitterly, spoken like a man who's never had to prove he deserves to exist. The thunder outside cracked, shaking the window. Richard reached out, catching her hand before she could turn away. "Valentina, listen to me. You are not what they say you are. You're brilliant. You changed everything." Her voice broke. "Then why didn't you say that when it mattered?" He hesitated, guilt flickering across his face. "Because I was scared." "Of what?" He met her gaze. "Of losing control. Of you." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and trembling. She looked at him, this man who'd built an empire, who never stumbled, never faltered, and saw something fragile beneath the surface. "Then maybe you already have," she whispered. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm raged outside the world, narrowing to the inches between them. His hand tightened around hers, his voice barely audible. "Let me make this right. Tomorrow. There's a conference with the investors. I'll tell them the truth about you, about what you did. No more hiding." Her eyes searched his, looking for the lie, but found only exhaustion and sincerity. "And after that?" He hesitated. "After that, we figure out the rest." She nodded slowly, though part of her still didn't believe him. "You'd better mean it." "I do." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Valentina, yeah." His eyes softened. "You were never invisible to me." And then he was gone, swallowed by the storm. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. At Carter Tech's headquarters, the lobby buzzed with reporters, cameras flashing like lightning. Richard stood at the podium, immaculate again, his voice steady as he spoke. "Our success," he said, "belongs not to me but to someone whose talent has reminded us all that brilliance doesn't come from background or privilege. It comes from vision. Her name is Valentina Ramirez." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Somewhere in the back, Valentina stood frozen, the words hitting her harder than she expected. Reporters swarmed, microphones flashing. Questions, applause, chaos. But through it all, Richard's gaze found hers. And for the first time, it wasn't the CEO looking at the janitor. It was a man looking at the woman who had changed him. She should have smiled, should have felt vindicated, but instead, a strange dread coiled in her stomach. Because the way he was looking at her, so open, so exposed, it wasn't just brave, it was dangerous. As cameras flashed and the crowd surged, a voice from the back shouted over the noise, "Mr. Carter, is it true you're romantically involved with Ms. Ramirez?" The room went silent. Richard froze. For a heartbeat, every choice he'd made balanced on a knife's edge. And then he said clearly, "No comment." Valentina's chest tightened. The applause faltered. The cameras clicked faster. And just like that, everything he'd built, the truth, the redemption, the fragile trust between them, hung suspended, waiting to shatter. The silence that followed his words was deafening. No comment. 2 syllables that cut deeper than any lie. The crowd erupted, reporters, shouting, cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward like weapons. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He simply turned away from the podium. The calculated calm of a man trying not to bleed in public. From the back of the room, Valentina stood frozen, every instinct telling her to disappear. But even as the storm of voices swelled around her, she couldn't move. His eyes had found hers again across the chaos, and for a fleeting moment, she saw it, the regret behind the composure. The truth he couldn't afford to say. Still, the damage was done. By the time the press conference ended, the story had shifted from admiration to accusation. Headlines hit within the hour. Carter denies relationship with employee amid scandal. The cleaning lady CEO won't acknowledge. Genius or distraction inside the rumor that's rocking Carter Tech. The same reporters who once praised her now dissected her life like vultures circling a fallen star. Her apartment, her education, even her mother's hospital bills. Nothing was off limits. She packed that night in silence, tossing her few belongings into a duffel bag while the TV whispered in the background. Richard's voice echoed from the screen, his official statement, clean and corporate, delivered with surgical precision. We maintain the highest professional standards at Carter Technologies. Ms. Ramirez contributed meaningfully to several initiatives, but any personal connection implied by media speculation is entirely false. Her hand froze mid-fold. Entirely false. She switched off the TV. The sudden quiet was unbearable. When the knock came, she didn't need to open the door to know who it was. His voice came through softly muffled by the wood. "Valentina, please." She didn't answer. "Let me in." After a long pause, she turned the lock. Richard stood there still in his suit tie, loosened exhaustion etched into every line of his face. The rain had started again, beating across his shoulders like cold glass. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. He stepped inside, ignoring the damp floor beneath him. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." She laughed short and bitter. "You mean the part where you denied I existed. That part I was protecting you. From what?" "The truth." His voice rose sharp and desperate. "From them. From the board, the shareholders, the vultures who would destroy you to get to me. You don't understand what this world does to people. It can't label." "I understand perfectly," she said, eyes glinting. "You wanted to save your company, your image, your perfect record. I was never part of that equation." He looked at her, something breaking quietly behind his eyes. "You think this was easy for me?" She turned away, her voice trembling but firm. "Everything's easy for you, Richard. You have power. You get to choose who matters and who disappears. I don't." He took a step closer, but she backed away. "Don't," she warned. "Not tonight." The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling through the streets like a heartbeat gone wrong. Richard's voice dropped to a whisper. "You changed me, Valentina. You made me see what I'd become." "Then maybe it's time you fix it," she said, grabbing her bag. "Without me." He reached for her arm. "Don't walk out like this." She pulled free, eyes blazing. "You already made that choice for both of us." The look on his face, half pain, half disbelief, was the last thing she saw before she shut the door behind her. Days turned into a blur. She took a temporary job at a small robotics startup across the bay, far from the glossy towers of downtown Seattle. It wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet, clean, a place to disappear. And yet every night when she stared at the screen of her second-hand laptop, the ghost of Carter Technologies lingered. The equations she had built, the algorithms she had refined, the man who had once said she terrified him in a voice that sounded like awe. Across the city, Richard was unraveling. The board had demanded damage control. Investors whispered about instability. Arthur avoided him. The staff moved around him like ghosts. He still ran the company with precision, but his eyes were elsewhere, on the space she had once occupied, in the corner of his office near the window. Every night he found himself staring at the skyline, the reflection of the city lights swimming across the glass. For the first time in his life, numbers couldn't solve what he'd broken. One evening, Arthur entered his office, tablet in hand. "We lost another investor," he said quietly. "They're nervous about the PR fallout." Richard didn't respond. Arthur hesitated before adding, "You could fix this, you know, if you wanted to. Make a statement. Admit what happened. Own it." Richard looked up slowly. "And destroy her privacy, turn her into a circus again. She already is," Arthur said softly. "At least this way she gets to be human again." Richard leaned back, exhaustion washing over him. "You ever make a decision that felt right and wrong at the same time?" Arthur smiled sadly. "Every day." Across the bay, Valentina sat on a park bench overlooking Lake Union, the city lights flickering across the water. The night air was cool, the breeze gentle against her skin. She had her earbuds in, but the music was only background noise for her thoughts. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it until she saw the message. "From Carter Tech PR Department, please be informed CEO Richard Carter has scheduled a press conference tomorrow at 9:00 a.m. PST regarding your contributions to the company's recent success. Attendance optional." She stared at the screen, her breath catching. He wouldn't, not after everything. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from a private number. "Richard, I know you won't believe me, but this time I'm not protecting the company. I'm telling the truth." Her hands trembled. She typed deleted, then typed again. "Valentina, don't do this for me." The reply came almost instantly. "Richard, I'm not. I'm doing it because I should have the first time." The message hung there, glowing in the dark. The hum of the city faded. For a long time, Valentina just sat there watching the water. Somewhere across the skyline inside a glass tower, she once cleaned the man who had denied her, was preparing to burn his world down for her. And for the first time, she didn't know whether to stop him or let him.